A bit of context. This is a new webinar series that we are hosting. It is something that I think I'd like to do at least monthly, if not every couple months. So if you guys enjoy this, if you get value out of it, please do let me know. For some context, it's kind of based off of the old TV show, the Home Makeover series, where we, collected applications from grant-making organizations as well as a ton of scholarship providers, you name it, from foundations, membership-based associations, all of the above, kind of detailing and outlining like what the day in the life looks like for their current initiatives. And then from there, we started to go through, and there was a large number of submissions. So we're providing feedback to all of those that submitted that didn't get selected. Trying to kind of come up with an idea at least for this first one, a program that's kind of sits somewhere in the middle. We had some applications submitted to us where their entire grant making initiative was done through paper binders and things like that. And then there were other ends of the spectrum where they're using kind of other platform tools that were out there. So we kind of chose somebody that sits somewhere in the middle that is using kind of online tools and technologies, not necessarily intended for grant management, but they try to like, repurpose it in a way to make it user friendly. But also from a process perspective, where not only can we take their program and launch it in Reviewer to kind of visualize it, but also add on some additional layers from impact reporting and things that we can kind of do to help elevate the experience. I think, and we'll kind of jump into this example, but I think a lot of times, especially as a foundation or as a nonprofit, we put so much time and energy into like our own operational tools and efficiencies. There's limited time. How can we make our lives easier? But in reality, in a program of this magnitude, there's so many other moving parts that I think are equally, if not more important. You've got the grantees and what their experience looks like. How do we put them in the best position for success? You've got your board members, your volunteers, your stakeholders, the review committees, donors, sponsors, you name it. And so, how do we start to rethink how we structure our programs, not just from an operational perspective, but something that we can use to provide ROI and a better experience for everybody else who's involved? And so I'm going to kind of introduce this specific example. This is like the fourth or fifth one of these meetings we've held this week. We've done them for scholarship providers and some other kind of use cases. What I had previously done is pulled up their actual process and kind of side by side paralleled it in Reviewer. That just took way too long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of just walk through a list here of some of the things that they're currently doing, where there's challenges that are being presented, kind of I think how we can solve those challenges, and then actually visually preview what this new model looks like, at least within Reviewer. Again, the goal here is to kind of visualize how we hopefully can help you guys as well. But if not, and you're using other platforms, you're going to try to kind of build some type of structure on your own. At least you can kind of visualize like the right approach to take this against. So we're very fortunate here at Reviewer to work with thousands and thousands of organizations of all shapes and sizes and locations. Our entire software and tool set is kind of a built by the people for the people type of system. It's really easy to sit here and say, hey, here's a bunch of tools or features or things that we think you might want. When in reality, you guys know more than us. And so again, very fortunate to be able to work with so many leading organizations that bring to us very unique ideas and workflows that they have that ultimately aren't that unique, and they're very translatable to other types of organizations. So the entire concept of reviewers is intended to be highly configurable, yet based off of like proven kind of core concepts and models that we know will execute the task at hand really well. So today we're going to focus on a foundation that focuses solely kind of on supporting arts and organizations in kind of the nonprofit art space. They specifically target four separate grant streams. Each one of them, however, is very unique. So they all have unique application processes, review and selection workflows, ongoing impact reporting needs, things like that. To kind of dive deeper though into what their processes look like. Very standard, they have information about who the grantee is. They want to get a better understanding for like what type of fund or grant that they're offering that best aligns with them. And then really trying to build a comprehensive, persona or snapshot of the grantees, right? Something that we can use to help differentiate one grantee versus another. In a world where there obviously isn't infinite money, it's obviously a very competitive grant selection process. And so we need to put the applicants in a position where they can put forth their best version, allowing us to compare them to the other grantees to make sure we pick the strongest candidates, but also those that align most with our mission and vision as a grant maker. So part of that includes obviously budgets. What is your proposed project or deliverable that you're trying to secure funding for? And then for me, it's like at some point we have to be able to measure ROI. And we'll spend a lot more time about this here later on. But as a grant making organization, how do we either go to new funders or our existing funding sources and kind of help showcase like the power of their dollar? And it's can be a kind of a challenging concept. So it's all about what data do we need from existing grantees to kind of help build that narrative. And I think more times than not, we want to put that ownership on them. So when I design a grant application process, I want the grantees themselves to kind of tell me how they're going to measure success, and then we can kind of from there start to work together on like what a reporting schedule looks like. But it's their proposals. Obviously, if we're going to tell them how to measure success, we typically fall short because they're the ones who are actually executing it against it. And then on top of that, any of the ongoing, supporting documents from, budgets to financial analysis to tax documents to references, things like that. So before they came to reviewer, or before we kind of selected them for this makeover, what was the day in life? So it's maybe a bit more of a unique process where it's not an open call for grant applications, although that is a very common thing that we see. First and foremost, there's like a letter of intent or an intent to apply. And so prior to using reviewer, these potential nonprofits or foundations applying for funding would actually reach out to them individually via email, expressing their interest. They would kind of work together to figure out like, are they eligible for the program? And then if so, they'd give them an actual link to actual submit. From a technology perspective, this is a very, very common workflow. I'd say well north of like 60% of foundations do this. They looked at like, how do we create some type of efficiency, right? We don't want people to manually send us like PDF emails of their grant proposals. We certainly don't want them to physically mail this into us. So they spin up built-in web forms. So your job forms, your survey monkeys, any of these type of like online form building tools. We'll kind of get some into the challenges here, but obviously it does elevate the applicant experience. They certainly are online, but it does pose a significant amount of ongoing labor and work from an operation perspective. What they found though is that they had a lot of alternate submission methods. So you'd have some people fill out things online, some might send them random emails. And then bigger picture, as people are like adding their documents and adding their deliverables, they realize that like maybe they wanted to update a record or they missed something later on. And so while they might have started this process online, what ended up happening is they'd call or email the foundation directly saying, hey, I have an updated XYZ document. They'd ship it off to them via email. And then from an operation perspective, now we have like very disconnected processes. So now they're downloading, they're exporting, they're trying to recompile it, things are getting lost, things like that. So with this type of workflow, we actually have a pretty strong issue on the grantee side of things. With all grant applications, we're collecting a lot of stuff, right? We're collecting budgets, proposals, tax documentation. So first and foremost, like how we collect that from a data security and compliance perspective has to be at our forefront. Anytime we have financial documentation being submitted to you guys, especially on behalf of a nonprofit, we have to be very, very aware of like how we collect it and how we store it. Number two is most grantees are not going to do this in one sitting, nor should we expect them to. And so in this current workflow, like if you're using a jot form, there is no way for you to save, log out, come back later. So what ends up happening is people open the forms, they try to view what's being requested from you, and then they go work offline, and then they come back and submit in one sitting. The challenge with that, though, is that life happens. And so things come up, the weekends hit, the family elements come up, and they either wait to the very, very last minute and miss deadlines, they have challenges along the way, or they just completely drop out. Now, I get it. It's not your job to get them to cross the finish line and to apply. But when we have our brand reputation on the line and, we're all community driven focused, like we want them to be put in a position for success. So, offering the ability to like have visibility of who started, who's finished, who hasn't finished, send them reminder messages, of course, becomes very, very important. I talked a little bit about like the file documentation, data security and compliance elements. We're also starting to run into issues with like file types and limitations. We live in a time now where files are progressively getting larger and larger, and there's so many different file extensions. So we want to make sure that we have no barriers for the applicants to add their supporting documents. But then also from your team or the review team's perspective, how do you actually physically access those? Raise of hands, like how many times has somebody sent you a link to like a Google Drive folder with a bunch of stuff that's password protected and then you physically can't open it? So we want to make sure we take all that in consideration. The next piece of this is more from the operation side of things. So I mentioned before that like these job forms and these built-in web forms are okay from an applicant perspective. But then once the submissions come in, that's when the real headaches approach. So now you're left basically going to job form, finding every single entry, you're downloading, you're exporting. And this is what happened in this example. And you're basically manually creating these like grantee packets, right? So you have like one packet or one binder virtually per grantee that holds on to who they are, holds on to their forms, holds on to their files file uploads. Again, there's no way for you to communicate with them. There's no way for the applicant themselves to come back and edit it or add to it. At the end of this, when we have grantees come back to do like impact reporting, they obviously can't like add it back to your packets that you manually created. So now they're going to send it to you via email. And again, you're downloading, you're exporting, you're trying to recompile it. You've got no idea who's actually done it or not. You have to send them follow-up messages. And then, of course, from the review and selection side of things, there's no way for you guys to physically share those grant applications with your team. So when I say like the reviewer side, I mean like your volunteers, your committees, your boards, whoever's in charge and helping you guys assess the grant applications, provide some type of scoring selection criteria. So this is also where data security and compliancy is a big red flag to me, because once you start to download and export, all those protocols that you might have had in place on the form now go out the window. So in this example, they basically dumped all of the grant proposals into Google Drive, right? So one folder per grantee. And then they share those links out to the review teams and those review committees. They alongside that gave them a spreadsheet basically saying, hey, one row per person, and then every column is like the scores and the comments and the notes that we want to leave for them. And so the review team has to go to Google Drive, download and export, view those documents, oftentimes using other tools, handwrite or log all their notes in their spreadsheet, and then they send it back in. And so when the results come in, what's basically happening is the foundation then has to take every single individual evaluation spreadsheet, remerge them together, and add a bunch of formulas to help you guys visualize like what the results were like. And then of course, like at that point, the program kind of ends. There is no ongoing, documentation, data collection from a fund disbursement perspective. Like it's very hard to log, how much you're going to fund them for, what their payment schedules look like. So you guys can kind of obviously visually see where these headaches come into play. And if this is something that's familiar to you, or this is kind of what your process looks like, obviously toss it into the chat or give a thumbs up or an emoji, because we can certainly help here. So and again, I'll share this presentation back out. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through absolutely everything. I am going to visually walk you through the solution. But basically what we focus on here is how do we optimize the applicant experience, both streamlining the intent to submit, but also having like a very comprehensive concept called a profile, right? Where each grantee is a profile, their profiles hold on to all the content and deliverables, not just on the submission side of things, but also like throughout the entire life cycle of the grant management experience. From an admin perspective, obviously, and I didn't talk much about this because I'm going to show it to you, is eligibility checks. You don't have the bandwidth to go through every single submission to confirm eligibility. We also don't want to waste the applicant's time also, seeing if they are eligible. We also incorporated a matching tool, which I'm going to show you to help kind of align the grantees with the proper funds that they best align with. And then we spend a whole lot of time enhancing the review and selection process, from the redaction of personal identifying information to avoid biases. In this specific use case, their review committee looked at every single grantee, and if you have upwards of 50 to 100 to 150 to 300 submissions, you physically cannot ask one person to review all of them. It's just way too many. We have very clear data at Reviewer that suggests that the limitation is about 30. So we know for a fact that if you were giving your team 50 submissions to look at, they did not give the same energy to number 47 as they gave to number 1, and the results reflect itself. So we implemented a model here where we can kind of equally and randomly share the workload amongst the staff, again, trying to avoid both bias, but also what I call volunteer fatigue, to help elevate the review. And then we completely reworked the entire ongoing impact reporting mechanism. We cannot live in a world where we require the grantees on their own schedule to manually create their own impact forms or surveys or documentation and then send it to you via email. You can't manage it. You're going to lose things. It's going to be a risk from an audit perspective. And then you have no physical way that you as an organization can measure your own ROI and the impact that you're having on people's lives. So with all that said, what did we end up creating and setting up for this organization? So first and foremost, we want to make sure that we keep branding intact. So with all of our clients, we want to start by using their websites for as much as we can. Your audience already knows who you are. They don't know who we are. So they have all their dates, deadlines, criteria on their page, and then they have a link to the different kind of programs that have additional details and deliverables. Now, one common bottleneck, and this is actually what's happening here, is that there was independent submission workflows per fund, right? So if I was to apply for the Arts and Leadership Residency versus the Future Focus Grant, I have completely separate submission forms. I have completely separate dates and deadlines, and they're being managed completely differently. And that's a problem. We want to have a centralized workflow where where everybody starts and then leveraging intelligence and tools to kind of filter them where they belong. So what we decided to do, and this is completely optional, is we spun up a very simple landing page. This kind of serves like a main hub that if you guys want to send the links out to or whatever it might be, you can have. It can be as complex or as basic as you want, but these are the details of the grant program. And then we have applicants create a profile. So this in itself is like the number one major difference between like your built-in web forms like Jotform and your SurveyMonkey tools. Those of you that use grant making platforms, this probably is very familiar with you. But there are so many moving parts to this program: submissions, files, communication, judging and scoring, logging transactions and funds, and then, of course, ongoing impact reporting. The only way that you can systematize these types of campaigns is through a concept called a profile. So, in theory, applicant creates a profile, and on the front end, it's going to be very simple. It's just their initial application form or their LOI or their intent to submit. But over time, that profile will continue to grow. If it's a recurring grant or you're measuring impact 3 years from now, you can kind of imagine how big that profile becomes. And it kind of serves as the record of truth for all activities that pertain to that grantee. So in this case, the applicant creates a profile and then it drops them into the submission process. So before review, what basically happened is they'd say, hey, fill out this form, right? Because they had one form per fund. Now, the challenge with that is two-part. Number one is eligibility. Every one of the funds has unique criteria. And as you guys know, people don't read. If you're looking for funding, you apply for literally everything you can think of. So they had a lot of ineligible applications coming in. We wasted their time applying. We wasted the organization's time reviewing them. Number two is there are really impactful programs that are being provided, right? Each of these four funds is going to change an organization's life. And on the outside, there's a lot of really deserving potential grantees that have no idea which of these funds that they best align with. So we kind of solved two challenges with one. We built in a built-in kind of eligibility kind of matching tool or a check tool to ensure that, yes, you really are eligible. But then also behind the scenes, there's a bunch of logic that's built in that says, hey, not only are you eligible, but these are the funds that you're eligible for. Which of or all of them do you want to submit? So to kind of quickly run through that, basically, there's a short form or a short kind of essay, and then based off of the results of this, which is a simple version, the system says, great, these are the three funds that we offer that you best align with. And then from here, the applicant can select which grant they want to apply for. Now, on the back end, which I will show you, we're starting to categorize people. So we know exactly at this point in time who's even started grant applications. So we can give you guys complete visibility of progress percentages, who's done, who's not done. You can send them reminders. We're also starting to categorize them, right? So if you have, 50 submissions come in, we might have 20 that are in the future focus funding, 10 that are in audience development, and another 20 that are in the arts and leadership one. I mentioned before that each one of these has very separate workflows. So if I choose, say, for example, like the arts and leadership residency, as soon as I progress on, or I'm sorry, future focus, the system will then say, great, thank you for choosing future focus. Here's what's being requested from you. And then the entire application is going to be completely customized for that particular grant. So it's one central entry point, leveraging kind of extreme logic that kind of pushes people down the right path. What you're going to notice, though, is that we're not putting a lot of effort on the grantee. We want all of their time and all of their energy to go to their content creation and building forth like their best proposal. We want tools to interact with them, not vice versa. So a relatively common grant application structure, we start off by basically saying, hey, who are you? Since this is a grant for nonprofits, we want to know more about like your EIN number, your contact information, things like that. It is an organizational grant. So obviously when you use tools like SurveyMonkey and built-in web forms, the only person that can do it is the person that applied, right? Because this is an interactive tool, this allows then the organization then to add other contributors or team members. So they can kind of add in additional staff. It'll send them invitations. They can collaborate. They can work on the proposals together. The next piece of this is the funding request. So trying to get a better snapshot of, okay, well, who are you as a grant maker or a grantee? What is this funds going to be used for? So we have obviously budget requests, how much you're requesting for funds, operational expenses, and then like what challenge are you trying to address? Now, clearly for you guys, all of these focus areas are going to align with like your own personal mission and vision. This helps you get a better idea, kind of a narrow target approach for like the type of grantees that you're looking for. Clearly, we want to fund people that align with your mission and your vision. The next piece of this is then going to be tell us more about your project, right? So I won't kind of go through all these details, but tell us more about like what primary challenges you're trying to solve. Tell us more about the project plan. Again, budget uploads, which we'll come back to. And then the next piece is going to be your learnings and outcomes. So this is part of a bigger conversation. Like I said, at some point, if this person gets selected for a grant, we need to kind of help hold them accountable and measure impact. And so again, like we're going to guide them through like a template of like, hey, here's how we want you to report back to us the impact that our funds had. But tell us in your own words, like how are you going to measure success? What is the definition of success? What are some of the KPIs that we're looking against? Like what's this roadmap? And this helps us build a very custom impact reporting template that this grantee will in the future use to submit. From there, we get into supporting documents. Again, data security and privacy at the forefront here. We're collecting financial statements, organizational charts, and then any additional documents that help support this foundation's mission. The next piece, this is a letter of support. So this is kind of an emerging trend and maybe a bit polarizing. What we want to do at this point is we're, again, trying to build a comprehensive picture of who the grantee is so we can differentiate themselves versus other proposals. Because what's going to happen is you're going to sit down and start reviewing them, and they're all going to be great. So how do you make a decision? So we're leveraging a concept called letters of recommendation or letters of support, which is very common in the scholarship making space. And it's a way for us to kind of like validate from a third party perspective how we feel this organization is going to serve the mission and vision. So what we're doing here, and this is a big problem because without a platform like Reviewer, if you were to go this route, most of those people writing the references submit it to you via email, and then you have to figure out like who does it belong to, what is this, how do you connect it later on. So in this example, we actually put in like the name and email of the organization or person submitting the reference, and then it triggers a direct email that goes out to them. So kind of jumping ahead, it would look something like this. So we do an e-signature, basically confirming the accuracy of our proposal. Obviously, we didn't lie about our tax ID numbers. And then that email goes out. So it'd basically say, hey, so-and-so, you've been asked to write a reference on behalf of Kyle. His organization is applying for a grant. Click here to do so. And then what happens is it brings them into a dedicated reference portal. So we try to do a unique spin on this. So reference letters are very academic focused. It's also becoming very old school. It's like a better reflection of the writing ability of the reference, not necessarily who it's for. In the grant making space, like we don't want academic reference letters. We're not speaking about them as a person. We want to know more about them as an organization, right? And so what we're doing is we're asking for third-party validation. We're asking them to rank them on a series of qualities that we're looking for in a grantee. And then instead of saying, hey, write a letter, instead we want to ask them three simple questions. So the person doing the reference just simply comes in, they see the questions, they answer the questions. Very, very low barrier. I'll show this to you of how we collect this information. But as soon as this gets submitted, it actually will then get attached automatically to the grant applications profile. So again, that profile is already starting to get bigger and bigger. So in my example of how this organization runs their grants prior to this, once these applications came in via Jot form, they basically had to dump all that data into spreadsheets and start to recompile them into folders. In Reviewer, we handle all that for you. So every grant making organization gets a kind of a dedicated command center. You guys can dive deep into the weeds on virtually any elements that go into the process. But the goal behind the grant kind of command center is to show you at a high level what's going on right now. So dates and deadlines, recent activity, and then like where are people within the life cycle? This is an incredibly important topic because for most organizations, you're going to have grantees at different stages and different milestones throughout their journey. So you need to be able to visualize from step number one, like who has even started creating grant applications? Are they done or not done? If they're not done, we can send them automation and reminders. From there, like who's in the review process, and then of course what phase of the review, because many of you may have multiple stages and steps while you're still collecting net new applications. And then equal if not more important is then those that we selected, like what's their ongoing reporting calendar look like, or what are those different milestones? So it'll allow us to see who's in like those different reporting stages. Are they done or not done? And if they're not done, the ability to send them reminders as well. So I've used that concept called profile quite a bit. I do want to visualize that for you. So the idea behind this is basically every single organization or grantee or whoever your end demographic audience is shows up in this menu. And I can sort and filter by my different grants or my different funding focuses. I can sort and filter by different dates and deadlines or cohorts, whatever filters you want. From there, we simply click on the organization's name. And then again, no longer are we living within spreadsheets and trying to build out these packets. The packets got created for you automatically. So in this example here, I have the Roots and Wings Foundation. They are the ones who are applying for the grant. I can see their focus area. I can see who they are. And then this is all of the content and deliverables that we requested from them during the grant application. So I've got contact information. I've got, obviously other contributors. I know how much they're requesting for funding. I know more about like their proposal. I've got file uploads. And then from here, we can actually take action on it. So in Reviewer, we can actually send direct emails, either one-to-one. We can send bulk messages and bulk emails. There's also a really powerful internal note-taking tool. So this allows you to do one of two things. You can actually send like direct messages to the grantee. So backtracking a bit, like maybe this was the LOI. So this is an organization that submitted interest for the grant. We reviewed it and said, yeah, we think you're a strong candidate. The next step is to fill out your full proposal. We would have used that communication tool to notify them, right, through messaging. They would then click on a link, brings them back into their profile, and then they advance on to phase two, which is the full proposal application. So now the profile looks a little bit different. We have the LOI and then we have the full proposal. There's also a way for you guys to leave internal notes. So as your team is collaborating and working together, you can log notes about a grantee, share it amongst your staff, but the actual submitter or the grantee themselves would never actually be able to see it. From there, we want to focus on file uploads. So this is a relatively condensed example. Like I've seen, some grants that have upwards of like 20 to 30 different types of file uploads, from tax documentations to budgets to financials, whatever it might be. So in this example, you can see that we have 5 different file uploads. And to avoid you guys having to download and export, or more importantly, avoiding your selection committees from having to download and export, if I press view, it actually embeds that file upload directly in front of me. So I can kind of interact with documents, I can look at budgets, I can leave comments or annotations on them. But again, the system keeps me all in one place. And then the last piece to this is that those references I talked about. So this would show us the list of who submitted references. And then if I press view, it actually embeds the reference directly in front of me. So what started with, I mentioned that concept of a profile, has now grown into profile, submissions, file uploads, references, communication, and activity. The only thing that we're missing here is the ongoing impact reporting, which I am going to come back to. So great, we've collected our submissions in a very user-friendly way, very low barrier for the grantees. We've been able to build these comprehensive snapshots of who they are. We can actually manage the content. We can send them communication. We can see, where people are at within these different stages. The next piece to this puzzle is we have to go through a review process, right? And so what makes this one a bit more challenging than most is they offer multiple focus areas. So not only do they have multiple focus areas, so they have 4 separate kind of grants and funds, they have different teams or different committees that they want to look at each one of them. And then there's a progression system. So once you go through an initial review, you move on to a phase 2 review, which in this case, which is an interview. And then from there, they combine the results from the initial review and the interview, and then move them to a finalist selection. That's when like the board members and the volunteers and the stakeholders and the donors come in to do their final selections. And then from there, we actually progress them on to ongoing impact reporting. So it's a really powerful concept where when the grantees began to create their profile, the system knows which fund it's for. So obviously in our example, I applied to the future focus funding. So as soon as I submitted, it actually dropped me automatically into that fund. So now we can categorize our entrants. It gives us a bunch more flexibility of how we want to pair them up with our team for selection. Each one of these can have different scoring criteria and rubrics. Each one of them can have its own dates and deadlines. Each one of them can have its own staff and teams. And you can kind of visualize that here, where if I go down to future focus, off to the right, whenever Simon, Paul, and Mark come into reviewer, they're physically only going to see future focus. When Sally, Sue, and Steve come in, they're only going to see the arts leadership residency. And again, you might have a dedicated team doing interviews. Great. Once you move people to the interview phase, there's a dedicated team. When they come in, they only see people who are in the interview phase. The other thing that we decided to implement for them was an equal and random distribution of submissions to their staff. So hypothetically, let's say there was a large number of submissions and a small number of staff. So maybe we don't want Simon here off to the right to look at every single future focus funding proposal. I can open these buckets up and it shows me what's going on. So it shows us exactly how many submissions are in that bucket, who our potential review team is, and then we can start to get really kind of creative with our pairing system. So if you ever wanted to, you could actually manually pick and choose which grantees get assigned to which evaluators or which committee members. In this model, we used randomization. So we said, look, we want every single submission to be reviewed 5 times, no more, no less. We want to equally share the workload amongst our staff, but we need to make sure that each grantee gets reviewed the same number of times. So you can bulk select your listing and literally type in give every grantee to 5 people or some type of range. And then the system will equally and randomly take your submissions and then divvy out that workload. Now, of course, at that point, if you wanted to override it and have more manual control, you certainly can. One thing we didn't implement that I think actually would have been a really good solution is a concept called judge queuing. So the idea behind that is every one of your volunteers and committee members does have different workload capacities. I said on average, that's about 30, but you're going to have some who are way higher and some that are way lower. One of the bigger challenges a lot of organizations have is they have a team that's in charge of doing reviews, but they either procrastinate or something comes up and they can't fulfill their obligations. So with this model, we can actually set a threshold and we can basically say, hey, we want all grantees to get reviewed 5 times, but we don't care how many people have the opportunity to review them. So the system will then take every grantee and give it to your entire team. When they come into the system, they can score as few or as many as they want. Once that submission is reviewed 5 times, however, it then falls off that list so nobody else can review it. So from a review team perspective, it's very low barrier if they come into the system and if the name is there, it needs to be reviewed. So there's many ways to kind of set this up. This is the model that we decided to go with in this example. The other thing that we did is we started to redact some information. Obviously, data redaction is an important concept. If there's anything that you're collecting that may negatively alter the perception of your team's view on the applicant, you should hide it. So things like demographic details, if you're collecting it, background, stuff like that. What we decided to redact though was personal identifying stuff that would cause problems, but also files. So like we need to know their financial history and their audits, but it doesn't have an impact on the selection. We're using it purely as a way to kind of like supporting documents to like audit what they say is actually true. So if that is the case, we don't want to show that to our committees. So in our example here, when the review team comes in to conduct a review, they get a very simple list of the grantees that you assign to them for selection. From there, they simply click on their name or ID and it pulls a split screen. So if you remember beforehand, for those of you that use, all of your built-in web form tools and your Google Drives or your databases, you basically don't have any of this type of capability. So the goal is to basically take the Roots and Wings Foundation and we shared their entire profile with this committee member side by side with a selection tool. So this is very low barrier because your review committee can kind of side by side, read through the application, log comments, log notes, log scores. They can jump up top, they can check out the file uploads. If they press view, it embeds itself directly in front of me. And then once they're done with the review, they simply submit their score sheet. We're a huge proponent of data-driven scorecards. I think we want to remove as much subjectivity as we can, also understanding that there are deliberations and compelling cases that can be made. So it's like we don't make decisions for you. We just want to give you guys all the data that you need to make the best decisions you can. So in this specific example, we have a built-in scorecard. We also modified their scorecard beforehand. They had like a scale from like 0 to 20. So like on a scale from 1 to 20, rank this organization's goals, right? That's an example. That becomes a barrier for the review team. First and foremost, they get really bogged down in numbers. So like how do we differentiate a 16 versus a 17? It also slows them down and then the results are a bit less quality. So in this example, we're trying to elicit an emotional response. So instead of on a scale from 1 to 20, we're asking like, do you mostly agree or entirely agree, right? Those are the two ends of the spectrum. Now, behind the scenes, those emotional responses still have point values associated with them. So when the reviewer comes in, they just answer from an emotional perspective, and then they submit, they move on to the next. From an organizational perspective, this grant making organization now has a dashboard and they can filter on their funds. So on each grant individually, it'll then show them a list of all of the people who applied to that grant. It'll show you exactly who from your internal teams reviewed them and then how they did the reviews, either individual scores, collective scores, averages, whatever it might be. And this gets used now for decision-making purposes. For some people, the scores tell the whole story. For others, this now powers really insightful deliberation meetings. They may decide to share the results out amongst their team once the results come in. That way they can kind of come to a deliberation meeting prepared. But then they pull this up and they kind of talk about the results and score and things like that. Once you're ready to start to award funds, or if it's a multi-phase program, you start to flag them off to the right, and at the bottom, you can progress them through their milestones. So next might be the interview phase, the next one might be the final selection, and then final awarding. That's when you can start to then edit their profile and start to log some of those details like payment schedules, how much you're going to fund them for. If it's a renewable grant, like how much are you going to fund now versus the total budget, like what is your total budget, how much is remaining, giving you guys that flexibility. One last thing I want to show you two more things. So number one here is I introduced a pretty tremendous issue, and that's the random review. So I'm a huge advocate of it. I think most people should do it. The downside to that is that means that not every grantee gets reviewed by the same people. So what happens if you've got a committee member or a reviewer who on average scores higher or lower than the rest? And you can kind of see it happening here where Mark scored this nonprofit a 12. But Judge Judy gave it a 31. So did Mark just score this grantee quite low because it was a poor quality entry? Or like, what if Mark has never given higher than a 15? By his own standards, he scored that person really, really well, but they're now being penalized for it. So we introduced a new tool called normalization. I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds on this, but basically what happens here, we'll focus on the green line, is it shows you individual judging tendencies by your team. So basically it says, hey, Judge Judy here in this column on average scores a 24. And then you can see on a per person basis how she scored them. Over here, Tony scored a 34. So as you can see, if I as a grantee was reviewed by Judge Judy, I inherently am being penalized because she scores me almost, 10 points lower than anybody else. So what this will do is helps you identify trends, but also it'll normalize it for you because we obviously wanted this person to be part of our committee for a reason. We value their input. So it starts to take it into consideration. So you can kind of see here that, we scored this person a 16. What that really means is they scored like roughly 20% lower than their own personal benchmark. This person scored a 29, which means they scored like 20% higher than their personal benchmark. So then on a per reviewer basis, we can start to compare individual averages versus one another. So the end results look kind of goofy, but they're really powerful. It might say something like your highest rated grant application on average scores 15% higher than average, whereas your lowest rated grant proposal scores like 35% lower than the average. And then you can start to use that for decision-making purposes. So something kind of unique. Worst case, you get to use it to help measure and identify tendencies. Best case, it helps you make more impactful selections. So once we select somebody, we log the amount we're going to fund them for. We do all kind of our administrative work. The next piece is, let's say we want to fast forward 1 year from now, and the application has now been selected, and we have to have them come back and do an impact report. This is like herding cats, right? People don't wake up every morning saying, "Hey, I got to submit my report." So for you guys, you have to have very clear visibility, like who's in that stage. Have they done it or not? If they haven't done it, send them reminders. And as they progress to that stage, like the automated messaging that says, "Hey, so and so foundation, it's now time for this year's grant impact report. You have until this day and at this time to do it." So how you solve that challenge is number one, making it very low barrier. So in the system, you obviously progress the grantee to that stage, you trigger that notification. And then from there, they simply come back into their profile. They're going to have a section for ongoing forms. They click add new, and then they have a series of templates. And it says, well, what are you trying to add? So, you might have multiple things in this list. One of them might be like a fund disbursement form or whatever it might be, or like a contract, right? In this case, I have a grant reporting template. So when it's time for me to fill this out, I just select it from the list, and then it opens up directly in front of me. So this is just an example, but basically, hey, here's my organization. Here's how much funding I received. Here's my initial goals versus my actual outcomes. Here's me explaining the discrepancies between those. Oh, by the way, do you remember when I filled out my grant application and I gave you some KPIs or how I'm going to hold myself accountable? Here's the results of that. Here's some of the impact that our proposal had. Here's the usage of my funding, lessons learned, areas of opportunity, and of course, like additional future funding or budgets. So we really lower the barrier for the grantee to fill out these ongoing impact reports. The best part about this is once it gets submitted, it gets stuck back on their profile. So if I go back to our example earlier on and say I pull up my applicant and I press view, it shows me the results of their impact report. So if you have them filling out multiple, again, you can see the profile continuing to grow. But when your internal team goes to do dashboarding and start to do your own personal impact reporting and like ROI measurements, it's now very, very easy for you guys to aggregate the data. So you can build up these like really empowering surveys of like, over the last 2 years, here's how much funding we gave. Here's a breakdown of the type of organizations that we funded. Of those organizations, here's the impact that they're having on their local communities, which then becomes like your battle card to secure additional funding or obviously work within your current donors and sponsors. So question came out, is it possible to set up automations or AI integrations in Reviewer? So yeah, so from an AI integration perspective, like we're not going to offer the ability to like do your own AI integrations. And the number one reason why is that we have to be very, very careful with how we store and share data for AI utilization. It's an evolving space. It's growing rapidly, way faster than I think most of us realize. And there's a ton of really powerful use cases and benefits of it. But we need to like, work backwards, like how do we do it in an ethical manner that's also being sensitive to the grantees' data. So we are working on a large suite of AI tools. We're hoping many of them will launch this year still to different extremes. So some of the very obvious things is helping you guys detect the utilization of AI. So are people using ChatGPT to help write them proposals, help you figure out who's using it and who's not and to what extent. Summarization of data, certainly. If you're collecting a whole bunch of file uploads and forms, how do you take that into like a more bite-sized 1 or 2 paragraph manner? That's not intended to be like your decision-making tool, but it does help you guys kind of get a good understanding of who the grantee is. Obviously, going deeper into eligibility checking using AI will be part of it. The other thing that we're working on as well on top of those is going to be the extraction of data out of file uploads. So, if I submitted a whole bunch of stuff such as my revenue or my tax documentation, and you asked me to submit my own tax documents myself, how do we pull that stuff out of the files to compare it for you to make sure like what they said actually matches their files, or obviously filled in for you? So that's going to be really beneficial. The end of the spectrum is also quantitative analysis, so it's very realistic for you guys to be able to say, hey, this is the how we evaluate grantees. Like this is what we're looking for in a grantee. Here's like what we value. So again, you could like weight it. So I look more for a community impact than budget usage, whatever it might be. And then basically using the data to really automatically review grant proposals for you. That's obviously going to be very polarizing, and it's not something that should be the end all decision making. What I think is going to happen, and some of the tools that we've built thus far, it's basically going to say, hey, here's like the AI results of our review. Does this align with your human review? Yes or no? And if not, hopefully, you guys can either identify things that the AI caught that you didn't, or vice versa. And then over time, that becomes a bit more beneficial. The other thing too, I want to show you guys, and I meant to talk about this, so I do apologize. There's a tool named Grant Guardian. It is a free tool for you guys. So it's the Patrick McGovern Foundation. They have done a really great job building some AI tools to streamline the financial review of your grantees if they are nonprofits or foundations. And this is going to be completely free for you guys. And so it's very simple for the two systems to work together. But basically, you pass your grantees from reviewer to Grant Guardian. It'll use their AI tools to do like a financial risk assessment for you. And it kind of kicks out some really cool metrics. And it can also do some 501c verification. So I did mean to bring that up, but yes, definitely consider this as well. Yeah, so question actually came out on reviewer implementation. So do organizations kind of like self-sufficiently launch and build reviewer, or are we involved the entire time? We want to be as hands-on or hands-off as you want us to be. So what a very common working relationship looks like is hopefully once you work with us, well, the first thing we do is we do a kickoff call, and we really do try to become an expert in what you're trying to accomplish. So on that call, we really unpack like what have you done in the past, like where do you want to be 2 years from now. We ask to look at like your grant application structure, how you do your reviews, and then at that point, we basically will start to build out timelines. So when do you want to launch? And then from there, we work backwards. And so we kind of create these different milestones of what needs to be implemented. And we decide who's going to do it. Are you going to do it? Or are we going to do it? Are we going to share the workload? And then for each element, we assign due dates. That way you can hold us accountable and vice versa. We have a lot of our clients that will start to log in and start to build out their forms, and they're extremely self-sufficient, and we're very hands-off. Others want us to take their processes, load it into Reviewer, and then obviously from there, you guys can do your own editing, or we continue to help. So, from a pricing perspective, those are some of the unique elements, right, that influence the pricing. But we want to be as involved as you want us to me, or lack of. We will provide ongoing support, obviously, throughout the entire relationship of the program. But yeah, the system is intended to be very simple to use. You don't want to be waiting for us to make small changes. Certainly not. Then the other piece to that too is, as we go through our onboarding, like there's going to be certain features that we have that you're just not going to be aware of, nor should you be. And so part of what we do is we kind of go deep into like where we think we can help provide value, very similar to what we did today, right? And we'll make some recommendations on processes, features, workflows. If you want to listen to us, it doesn't hurt our feelings, but it's kind of our way of like bridging the gap between like your experience in your program and then like obviously our experience in some of the programs that we work with.